So if you're just joining us, you've missed some aspects about the pronunciation of T, but we are going to pull it all together now and look at it with rules. So the dialect of English that we've described has this phoneme. We're going to represent it with T because that's the elsewhere allophone. And we've talked about several allophones of it: the glottal stop, the flap, the aspirated, and the unaspirated T. There are others. And of course, phonemic status is language dependent. So in Hawaiian, in Arabic, that glottal stop is its own phoneme distinct from T. So here's the distribution we found for English. We saw a glottal stop before unstressed vowels. They're followed by N. There's the most specific one, so that's why we're starting with it. It's flap. It comes out as a flap before other unstressed vowels. So commonly like butter, L like battle, M like bottom, ing like bedding, E like party. But even if you have a word like Cardiff, has a D there that also flaps, that's going to be flapped in this, even though we don't have a lot of if final words. There's some complicating factors we don't need to talk about for this. We did hear the aspirated T at the beginning of words and also stressed words like a test and until. And elsewhere is T. There are a couple other ones, but it's easiest to see this as elsewhere for T. So like I said before, we call the phoneme T because that's the elsewhere one. And that allows us to not have to state a rule for where T occurs. It's just everything that's left. So you can crudely think about it as it takes the slashes, turns them into brackets. And now we're going to take this distribution that we've discovered and make it into a rule. So we have this standard rule format. It's in your textbook, and they call it X arrow Y / C _ D. And you can pronounce that X becomes Y, or X is pronounced Y in the following environment after C and before D. So breaking that down, X is the phoneme. We're going to start off by just writing an IPA symbol there. We'll be able to generalize that more as we go. The arrow to Y, that tells us which allophone is represented. Again, that's going to be an IPA symbol as well. So if you think about your Spanish homework, it's going to be that S is going to become Z. The slash signals that we're going to start talking about the environment. So we're switching from the phonemes to where it happens. And then you have the C and D. That's the before conditioning environment and the after. So as we mentioned in class, some phonological rules at more advanced levels will sort of reach to 2 or 3 or even further away. But in this class, of course, it's always going to be right next door. And I mentioned in class, we're not doing baby phonology. A lot of these triggering environments are right next door. So let's look at some rules for these distributions we talked about. So T is pronounced as a glottal stop before unstressed vowels followed by N. So to write that, we have a T as the phoneme in slashes, the arrow to say we're talking about the pronunciation, and then the glottal stop in brackets. Now we're going to talk about the environment. The underscore is before this vowel, so it's before, and then in standard abbreviation, we can use a capital V, and then an N. You could also have said plus vowel minus stress to describe it entirely by its features, but it is common to use capital V for C, capital V for vowels, capital C for consonants, capital N for nasals, capital L for liquids. Okay, so it also becomes a flap before other unstressed vowels. So T becomes a flap before stressless vowels. So we have this one is going to come in first and take out all the T's that need to become glottal stops, and all the T's before stressless vowels that are left are going to become flap. And then we have 2 times we get a aspirated. First is at the beginning of words. Remember, this hashtag symbol means word boundary. So T becomes an aspirated T at the beginning of words and also before a stressed vowel. And again, we could write plus vowel plus stress if we wanted to. And T elsewhere, we don't write a rule for that. We just say the elsewhere condition can handle it. So here's this rule again. T is pronounced glottal stop before unstressed vowels followed by N. And by the way, both of these formulations for the rule are totally okay for this class. So if this way of writing a rule here that's all these special symbols, if you have trouble understanding that, feel free to write every rule you want as a sentence just like this. I don't care if you learn the new format or not. Some of you are probably scientists and mathematicians who like this format. Some of you, it's very opaque. Feel free to write them like this. And these are both 100% finished rules, the sentence format and the formal format. So the problem with this rule is an IPA symbol, that's handy for us, but it's just feature bundles. That's why when we went through all the sounds of English, we talked about the features of each. We used articulatory feature bundles. We'll talk about another type of feature a little bit in our next class. So instead, instead of saying T, we can say voiceless alveolar stops, and they become glottal stops before an unstressed vowel, that's this, and an alveolar nasal. So an N is just alveolar nasal, very easy to describe. We don't need to say it's voiced because there's no voiceless one to distinguish it from. Just like we don't need to say the glottal stop is voiceless because there's no voiced glottal stop. Imagine being able to create voicing and also stop your glottis at the same time. The problem with this rule is it says stops become stops. We can make a more parsimonious rule, and that's going to be that's going to be easier for language learners, infants, to acquire. They have to learn the whole language in 5 years, right? So we don't want them to memorize something silly like stops become stops. So we fix our rule. We take out stop from the result. So now we can just say voiceless alveolar stops become glottal before an unstressed vowel, then an alveolar nasal. You see, I like to read the sentence format rule, although as a phonologist, I do like to write the formal notation rule. But as I said, in this class, either one is good. This is just a translation of this into plain English. And instead of become, you can always say is pronounced as. You want to be a little more clear about that. The important thing is we said it was a stop on both sides, and we got rid of the second one because it was already a stop. So for this one, when you talk about flaps, just remember that D also flaps. D does not become a glottal stop. D flaps in that position. So we're just going to look at both of the alveolar stops here. So T and D are pronounced as a flap before other unstressed vowels. So we want to get rid of those IPA symbols. You can use some IPA symbols on some steps of your 4th hour 4, but you don't want to use them the whole time. And by the end, you're going to get rid of them, as you can see. So here's a version of this rule with features. So plus stop plus alveolar goes to plus flap plus alveolar in the following environment for a plus vowel minus stress segment. Again, in plain English, alveolar stops become alveolar flaps before an unstressed vowel. We do not mention both target stops, right? We would never say voiced and voiceless because that's redundant. Voiced and voiceless is all the types of stops. We just mentioned that natural class stops alveolars. But again, we have this problem where we're saying alveolars become alveolars, but they're already alveolars. So we want that more parsimonious rule that's easier to acquire. And so we take out that second instance of alveolar, and instead we say alveolar stops become a flap, or alveolar stops become flaps before an unstressed vowel. Now the rule is one feature fewer. So why did we go through all that? We looked at a bunch of phonological problems in 2 different ways. Well, the reason we looked at English phonology is so you can witness the phonology occurring in your own grammar. It's especially useful with T and D because we really hear it with like ladder and ladder. We can really hear that happening. Some phonology like stop and top, we don't even notice until someone points it out and holds a dollar bill in front of our mouth while we talk. And of course, a lot of you are teachers or future teachers in this class, and knowing that English phonology would help. Maybe you might feel like, oh, my kid is saying mitten, but it's spelled mitten. Well, now you know that that's the common pronunciation in American English, and mitten is if they're saying mitten, that's maybe just being precise, or like I said in class, trying to distinguish it from the word midden. So why do we look at those foreign phonologies, especially for those of you who had signed up for a class you thought was called Intro to English. Well, it's really helpful because when the sounds you look at are not allophones of the same phoneme in English, you can easily distinguish them, right? So when we look at Spanish and hear them saying S sometimes and Z other times, that's so easy for us in English because we have minimal pairs like su and zu that can help us distinguish them. So we might have trouble, you might still be having trouble hearing the difference between T, unaspirated and aspirated T, and the glottal stop. So that's why we have to segue into Korean and Spanish, especially, and then Russian in our next class to get this right. And this also might make foreign pronunciation less intimidating because you can see it as a systematic process. It's not random. So this is the 4th hour that you're going to be working on for Tuesday for our next class. So you're going to decide if S and Esh are allophones of the same phoneme, and in English they are definitely allophones of different phonemes. We have minimal pairs like C and she, or a more advanced one like Dixon, diction, where the only difference is one has an S, one has a sh. Or you want to see if maybe in Korean they're going to be allophones of the same phoneme. So you're going to go through this data set step by step, and that will help you figure that out.